Good stuff. Looks like we're live. Just getting set up here. Okay, welcome back everybody. Hopefully this is the last part of the Dreamcast project. Fingers crossed we can get this all done today. Where we left off last time, just as a refresher, I got all of my grounds separated on my IDE cable. This is a IDE cable that has twice as many conductors in it. For whatever reason, I haven't looked up what the purpose of these are, but it looks like the majority of them have half as many wires, which means I had to go and sort through them all, identify which ones are all grounded and connected together, and these are the actual signal pins. So from here, now I can start counting, getting the proper pin numbers off of these, and connecting them to the actual solder points that I need to. So I think job one today is going to be, I'm going to put fresh dabs of solder at all these points. That's just going to make it easier when I go to solder the wires on. I've got fresh solder that's easy to melt. It's not going to give me any trouble. And then from there, I'm just going to start grabbing wires, stripping them back with my nice little thermal tweezers that I've been using. That worked great last time, so I'll keep that up. And try and keep this as neat as possible, really short runs. The cable's already been hot glued in place just at this end here, so it's not shifting around, and we should have a nice flat result that'll tuck under the motherboard and not cause me any trouble. And then once all the actual signal wires are done, I'll take every single ground that I've got here, we'll trim them back, bridge them together, and then have a single ground run that goes to the pad it needs to. And if we're very lucky, just like what happened with the actual BIOS chip, it's going to work on the first try. I won't hold my breath though. So I'm just going to dive into it. I'll pull up my schematics here, grab my iron, and start touching up those pads. I'm going to keep using this no clean flux that I got recently. It's way better than the old rosin stuff I had. It doesn't leave a big gummy mess everywhere. This was the Chip Quick no clean liquid flux. CQ4 4LF, if anybody's interested. Okay. I just got the same playlist going that I had last time because it's not supposed to get any copyright strikes. So if any of the music choices sound questionable, it's not been personally curated by myself. I'm actually going to disconnect my tweezers just so they're not heating up unnecessarily. And let's get going. The technique I'm using here is I just get a little solder on the end of the iron, some extra, and then I'm just touching it to the pad and pulling straight up, and it's melting very quick. My iron's running at 630 right now, Fahrenheit. It's just to build up the pads. I'll see if I can get a close-up of this just to show what's happening, what the difference is. So, gotta work in the mirror here. Focus. So it's these groups of pads here, all the round ones. Oops, there we go. So the shiny ones that are on the right side of the screen right now haven't been touched yet. They're just the stock finish, and the two columns on the very edge of the board there I've already done. So let's see if we can see the height difference. There's actually an extra buildup of solder on those. That kind of shows it. So the ones closer to the edge of the board are actually taller now, and the ones inside are very flat because that's the factory finish. So I'm just building up extra solder. All right, we'll do the rest of them. And so when I go to actually get the wires attached, this gives me a little more meat, a little extra solder already on the board, so I'm not fiddling with trying to get things attached properly. And because I'm pulling straight up, there's no chance that I'm accidentally shorting extra pads to one another, which you definitely want to avoid. This will just make things easier for me in the future when I've got 40 wires in the way. Thankfully, it's not like working on the legs of some of these chips where you have to really worry about accidentally shorting things. It should be pretty easy to keep them separate. It's just going to be fiddly work, that's all. Okay. I know it didn't show up really well on the camera, but I do see these are nice and tall now. We got extra material. I'll try and tin the wires before I join them as well. So it should be a very painless way to get the wires connected. That's the theory anyway. Okay. I'm just going to double check what I worked on last time. This should be pin 1. Grab the multimeter. Grab a little chunk of wire that I can use to probe the connector. Move some clutter. Actually, I could have done that a better way. I've already got the wire stripped, might as well use them. So this should be pin 1. Let's see if we get a beep. Set your multimeter on the right setting. Good. All right, and I know pin 2 is a ground, so let me check pin 3 also, because I'm having to count every other wire because of this weird ribbon cable that I picked. Here's number 3. We'll hook that up and check the same on the connector. And then we're off to the races. That's what we want to hear. So we can get cracking, and I'm just going to work off the assumption that the wires are continuing in the numbering order. It seems completely logical. There's no reason it shouldn't at this point. All the hard work has been done now. So this was something I brought up in the last video too. The way that my cable is laid out, we've got pin number 1 will be at this end, and coming all the way over here, this will be the pins 40 or 44, I forget. Yeah, 44. So I'm going to work it where I'm going to start on the high end here, and it just so happens that on my groups of connectors over here, the higher numbers all seem to be clustered on this side, and then it gets lower as we go. So my plan is I'm going to do sort of a right angle, and then as each group of wires comes, the lower numbers will have a longer run around the outside, and we should be able to keep everything laying nice and flat. Now my concern is I don't know how sensitive my compact flash adapter or the IDE standard in general is with regards to wire lengths. A ribbon cable is very specifically cut so that all the wires are the exact same length by default. So when I'm laying it out this way, there's going to be much shorter wires on one side of the cable than the other, and I don't know if that's going to mess with the timings of some things. But I'll give it a go this way, and if it doesn't work, I'll tear it out and start over, because I couldn't find any concrete info out there. Perfect. Okay. So the highest number connector I see here, I've got a list of ones that don't need to be connected either. 40 is going to be our ground. And I was wrong before, it's not 44 connectors, it's 40. So the last one is a ground, which is good because I've already got it grouped in with the ground wires. Next one back is going to be 39. And let's see if I have a point labeled for 39 on my board. I also have no connection labeled. And the highest number for no connection is pin 34. 39 is actually the active LED wire, so this can be hooked up to show on your computer when you're accessing a hard drive, the LED blinks. Same deal for this. I'm not going to wire in a separate LED for this. I don't think it's required. If it is, I need to put a resistor in line 2 with an LED. So I'll try without, and if it doesn't work, that's going to be the first thing I troubleshoot. I'll try adding one of those in and see if it helps. So next we've got 38. So we skip a wire after 39, because that's the ground in between each wire. Here's my 38. And I've got the pin it's going to go to, right down here. And it's time to hook up my tweezers again, so we can strip this wire off far away from the end. We're going to go halfway, and I'll trim off the extra. So we'll heat that up, and I think I had my tweezers running at 450 last time. Oh hey, Aaron J. I am modifying a Dreamcast. This is a Dreamcast motherboard. I'm installing an IDE cable so that I can actually boot games off of a hard drive, or in my case I'm going to use a compact flash adapter, which runs off of an IDE bus. I've got one of these guys. A Dreamcast toaster. That'd be pretty sweet, actually. Or maybe a popcorn machine with a Dreamcast built in. These tweezers are making real short work of stripping wires. They're great. What is a Dreamcast? Wow, I haven't heard that one before. It is a console from the turn of the century, I think, right at the millennium. 99, I believe this was released. The Sega Dreamcast. It was a big deal back in the day, and it completely fizzled out. It died too soon, is what a lot of people think. I never actually had one growing up. This is only something I've gotten into recently. But I have to admit, it's a pretty cool console. I wasn't going to be that mean about it, Viking Steel, but yeah, I was a little surprised. Kids these days, right? I was absolutely a Nintendo fanboy growing up, so the N64 was my jam. All right, first wire is attached, and I need something to trim the extra off. We'll use side cutters. Commodore 64, nice. I've actually never played on a Commodore 64. My nerd cred is lacking. I love the music that comes off those things, though. That sound chip is really, it's a real classic. My very first console was an NES, but I didn't get hardcore into the games until GoldenEye on the N64. All right, next pin is going to be 37. Actually, let's see if I can hold this up and just show the first wire result. So, you can see there's a short little wire here that's coming off the board, and it's going straight to that pin. So I'm doing that for about 28 other pins. Moonstone on Amiga. I know nothing about that game. Let's have a look. Man, the graphics look great for a computer that old. Is it like an action RPG? I can't really tell just by the screenshots I quickly checked out there. I love how people were able to push those really old computers. All the hacks that you read about that they used to make things look better than they actually were. The way they got sounds out of the chips. It's really impressive. Co-op of up to 4 players. Man. I might have to check that out in an emulator, maybe. That sounds kind of cool. I don't think I would go out and buy an Amiga. I don't really have any nostalgia for that, just because I never had one. And I don't know if it's worth it for some of the games that are on it. But I'm intrigued now. See if I can wiggle this wire off, actually. That would give a nice clean break. Yep, that'll work. So instead of taking my side cutters and making a big, ugly tail hanging off of these, I'll just solder the wire in place and then wiggle it until it snaps off from wear. Yeah, I remember those cheat guides. they had we had book fairs at school, so you could order all kinds of books in, and the ones my friends and I always went for were the video game cheat guides. I'm sure that's not what they designed the book programs for, but getting one of those was a treat. I would read it over and over again. I would know cheats for games I'd never even played, just because, you know, you're bored on the school bus, so read your cheat book. We were pretty nerdy kids. All right, 36 is coming down here. I know, the magic is totally gone when you can go on the website. I remember finding my first cheat code website, Cheat Code Central, Cheat CC. I still remember that. And it was mind-blowing at the time. But now, yeah, you totally miss the nostalgia of, you know, having to dig through a Nintendo Power or some other strategy guide to find a tip because you were stuck on a level. Or asking your friends, imagine that. Asking someone else how they beat a level. Those were good times. Ooh, Rise of the Tomb Raider. I haven't played that one. I loved the old Tomb Raider games, but I haven't played either of the new ones. I think there was the one just called Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider are the two most recent, and I haven't touched either. I've heard great things about them. I'd love to get a Vive, or Vive, whatever you're supposed to call it. Man, I bet that looks cool. Well, have fun with that. And I appreciate you dropping by. Was that really 2013? Oh, jeez. Makes me feel like an old man. I'm so out of touch now. I've been playing a lot of PUBG. That's my jam right now. So I do have some recent games I play, but I don't have the time, it seems, to keep up to date on all of them. Hardware designers. Yeah, there's something to tinkering with things like this. Getting your hands dirty, so to speak. I like it. Okay. This one needs some flux. It's not sticking well. Old handheld Tetris games. I've never seen one. I imagine they made a lot of those games portable. That's why wouldn't you? Probably knockoff too. Was that an official thing, or is it just one of these clone kind of systems? Okay, cool, yeah. The only portable systems I had growing up were those really weird, like not even a Tiger knockoff. You know, even cheaper than that. They were so basic. But hey, it's what you got, so you had fun with it, right? Okay, so I've run into my first pin that doesn't get connected to anything. I'm just going to lay that aside. I don't know if I'm going to trim it short or keep it long and heat shrink them at the end. But I'll just lay it off to the side for now and continue. Yeah, exactly. I had this giant console. It must have been, I don't even know how to compare it, like even bigger, probably two of my hands. It was this huge, like giant, ugly remote control shaped thing. And it had this terrible clone of Breakout on it. I loved it. I couldn't get enough of that stupid game. It was Breakout in some game where you had to, instead of that, it had a different variation where you had to catch falling blocks in just a little basket, and the basket would shrink the farther you got. Hours and hours. Yeah, and the Switch is so incredible when you think back at what we used to play on. I'd love one of those too. These wires feel tiny, but they're not as bad as the chip I had to do. Still. The BIOS chip on this thing was a nightmare. It worked on the first try, but it wasn't fun, even getting that far. Joints haven't been holding as well. I think some of the flux is disappearing. So I'll keep this at the ready. I got lucky with my first few wires. I was able to move nice and quick. That looks better. Flux is key, everyone. Don't forget it. Switch controls for tracking in VR. I have no idea. You might be able to do a rudimentary kind of thing. I think the Switch, the Joy-Cons, right? They've got accelerometers and stuff in them. I don't know if they read infrared like the Wiimotes did. If they could do that, then you could be a little more accurate, I think. But I think the actual controllers for the Vive and the Oculus have, what's it called? They've got actual infrared LEDs on them as well, so it can be tracked by the headset in conjunction, unless you're talking about something different. Oh, cool, the Wii controllers work on the Switch. Interesting. Yeah, I bet somebody could hack it together. It's beyond my ability for sure, but I don't see why that wouldn't be possible. Okay, 32 is also not connected. Hey, we're flying. Oh, you use the candlelight. Very nice. I think I did the same thing actually. I bought a Wiimote like 2 years before I actually committed and bought a Wii. And I used it with I went out and got a Bluetooth adapter for my computer, which was also kind of a new thing at the time. And I used, somebody hacked some software to run on the computer. And I'm pretty sure I did 2 candles in front of my big old CRT monitor and played with a Wiimote on the controller, or on the computer. I remember rigging up the accelerometers in the Wiimote to drive a car in Need for Speed. And it was the most awkward, stupid thing. You had to like hold the Wiimote like this, and then you would turn it left or right and tip it forward to go faster and pull back to brake. It was completely pointless and stupid, but I had a great time with it. This seems to be a pretty good way to do this. Get your point soldered down first. I'm going halfway up the cable. and the tweezers are a real hack to making this much quicker than it should otherwise be. If I had to strip each one of these ones with manual, mechanical strippers, this would be brutal. But instead I can just pinch them with these irons that are at 450, and it just melts the insulation perfectly. Okay, must make sure I don't lose count though. Let's do a quick spot check actually with the multimeter. This would be easier with, I've used the wrong IDE cable here. So let me quickly pull this up. So you can see this is the IDE cable. You have to use one of these ribbon cables and connector because the Dreamcast is actually wired up with the same kind of connectors. It's just they're using different plugs for it. But the Dreamcast's disk drive runs off the same technology. But anyway, you can see how fine these wires are in here. There should be 40 of them in here. Here's a different IDE cable from a different manufacturer. And you can probably tell the wires in here are much wider. And that actually means there's a lot less of them because they're the same width. So what's happened is this cable, for whatever reason, has got twice as many wires as a normal one. And every other wire in here is actually just a ground. They're all connected together. I don't know if it's designed to reduce interference or why they chose to do that. But it means I had to take half of the wires, this bundle up here, and test each one individually with my multimeter and confirm that they're all grounded. So these ones I don't have to worry about. I can just bundle those together at the end, wire them together, and connect them to ground. But this group of loose wires over here, unfortunately, each one of these is going to have to get wired up to something. So it could be easier, but it's still a bit of a pain. You still got 40 to work with no matter how you slice it. So some people recommend you take a Sharpie and mark, say, every 10th wire on here with a black line or something so you don't have to count so much. Yeah. No interference at all. Why don't they make foregrounds? Let's just go nuts with it. I'm sure there's a great reason for it. If I took the time to Google, this might be a pretty common thing that I've just never heard of before, but I was halfway into doing this. I got all my ends stripped and I was ready to go, and then that put a big damper on things. Good. We're still on track. Somehow I haven't screwed this up yet. 28. Beauty. I'm actually shocked at just how tiny the Dreamcast is. For the quality of the graphics that thing churned out, it's really compact, and it doesn't have a big external power brick like your Xbox 360 or the Wii's got one too, right? It's all inside. They just have one tiny power cable goes into it, and they crammed it all in there. It was a pretty awesome machine. It's a real shame it didn't catch on. I think it died too early. Although at the time I was a Nintendo fanboy and wanted nothing to do with it either, so I guess I'm part of the problem. All right, I don't connect 28 to anything either. 27. North Korea launch panels of Dreamcast. It'd probably work better than their stuff, right? That's the computing power they're missing. Thank God they don't have a Dreamcast, or we'd all be screwed. So here's what's going on. Here's what I've done so far. When I hold it up, it doesn't actually look like that much work. These wires have all been permanently joined now, and you can see that that right angle is kind of starting to show. There's quite a few overlapping, unfortunately. I thought it would look a little neater, but the main thing is I'm keeping it really flat. So when I put the motherboard, it goes the other way up in the console. So when it's going to be sitting, it's not going to touch the metal plate that sits in the bottom of the case or anything, and it should look completely stock from the outside is my ultimate goal. I don't want to have to cut holes in anything. A lot of people run these cables at the back, and then they have a big, ugly hard drive sitting behind the console. I'm trying to avoid that. I bet it would be an upgrade. I was kind of fascinated with North Korea because it seems like it's a real time capsule. It's just kind of frozen in like the Soviet era from the Cold War. So for a while I wanted to take a trip there, and then everything got much crazier. So there's no way I'm doing that anymore. But yeah, for a time I was really intrigued by it. Some of the pictures just look out of this world bizarre. '27 coming down here. Okay, I've got to come at this one smart, because now there's going to be a lot of connections that have to be made right around here. So I can't do it the pretty way. I have to do it the efficient way. And try not to burn my arm off. Always a plus. That's kind of ugly. It shocks me to know how old a lot of those planes are. All the military stuff, like the most recent, the planes that I grew up knowing that were awesome, they were started development in like the 60s or 70s. They come actually into production 20 years after that. So yeah, by the time they're already flying, they're nowhere near current tech. I read a really good book about that called Skunk Works recently. It goes into the way they built the first stealth fighter, the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane, and it kind of digs into the corporate and political side of things too, and why only a few big companies get to build those kind of planes. Pretty interesting book. I'd recommend it to anybody who likes planes in general. Two candle lights. One thing that's still amazing to me, the Blackbird spy plane. They designed that thing in the 60s, so there was no GPS to tell them where they were when they're flying halfway across the world at Mach 3 or whatever that thing does. So they had cameras on the roof of it that face up into the sky, and they were actually tracking stars because the stars would always be in a fixed position in the sky and they could rely on those. So they had computers and cameras in there that were tracking the stars to use as a guidance system, and they built that thing in the 60s. Yeah, exactly. You couldn't fly that plane to a different planet and fight. So they had to chart out all the stars as we see them here on Earth, but then they could use it to navigate. Those modern helmets are apparently amazing. I've never actually seen what the pilots can see through them, but supposedly it's like at least 50 grand or something crazy like that for each helmet. So they're just packed full of computers and displays too. I need to check that out actually. That seems pretty interesting too. Get one of those and hook it up to an Oculus. You need coffee when you're up there. Although there's no bathroom, so you can't have too much. Yeah, we don't get any of the Top Gun dogfighting anymore, unfortunately. All those missiles can shoot people that they don't even see. Planes over the horizon and they'll still get you. You just caught a mistake. Good thing. That doesn't belong there. They would definitely block those sites. You cannot be distracted up there. Hands off. Would you care to explain what you were doing for 5 minutes there while you turned off your radio, pilot? No, sir, I don't want to explain that. Mission accomplished. I keep scaring myself that I've messed up and that I'm losing count, but it's all lining up okay. Oh, I messed up another one. Whoa, I'm slipping. That's too high. Hopefully I can make that reach. I cut it too short early. Yeah, 28. I'm working from the top down, actually, so it's I've got a lot more to go. And I've soldered a couple to the wrong points, unfortunately. I am going to need to repair this one. That's too far gone. Thankfully, we got lots of extra laying around here. PS4, oh man. There is apparently an overclock mod you can do on this thing too. But I don't know how useful it is. I overclocked my Nintendo 64. And the problem is all the games, because the console is a standard piece of hardware, when companies program games for it, they're expecting everything to run very specifically. So I don't think I would go for a overclock mod or anything on here, because it doesn't really give you that much of a benefit, or if it does, it screws things up. Because they're counting on things to run at a certain speed, and if something goes faster, they can't always handle it. I know in the N64 I expected to get more frames per second, because that's always an issue on that old thing. And some like cutscenes would run faster, but the majority of the stuff you care about doesn't really have an effect. Got a little extra flux on there. Yeah, I know with later consoles like the PS4, they run more like a modern computer game where they're used to different hardware, and they can accommodate for changes like that. I'm not sure if the Dreamcast counts if it's right on the edge of that era where they flipped over. I bet the original Xbox could handle it too. I'll have to see how difficult the Dreamcast overclock is. Maybe it's worth doing while I'm at this. Okay, I think I got the repair done. I'll just need to get something to insulate that with when I'm all done, and I don't have my tape here. Don't know what I did with it. I have no heat shrink tubing either. That's okay. I don't think I gotta worry about them popping. I'm trying to minimize the static though. I'm on a nice concrete floor here. Use a nylon jumper on carpet. Man, for the amount of stuff I've done, the amount of computers I put together on a carpet, somehow I still haven't broken it. I don't know how I've gotten so lucky. I probably should have messed things up. I'm just really careful to touch the chassis, keep it connected to a ground with the power supply off. And it hasn't bitten me yet. Yeah, yet, exactly, Jeffers. Someday I will pay the price. But until then, I'll remain ignorant. $26. Okay, finally back on track after fixing my mistake. I've got a Pace. I'm using an MBT 250 hot air rework station here. I've got an iron and I've got some thermo tweezers that I'm using to strip the heat shrink. This is complete overkill for the work I'm doing. Yeah, I got lucky. I got a really good deal on this from a previous employer. So I get to use this kind of stuff at home. I was never a professional. I did work testing circuit boards in a shop, but soldering was never my main task. So I'm still an amateur. I just got really nice equipment to do it with. I know, this is giant solder. Tell me about it. I'm using what I've got. It's monstrous. I have to be real careful with how much I'm putting on the tip. And I scrape off extra if I get too much. This is for my own board. Don't worry, I'm not no professional modder. This isn't going to be for a customer or anything. So if I make any mistakes, it's just on me. The tip is gigantic too. I got a great deal on the actual station here, but the problem with having this kind of pro gear for home is replacement parts are super expensive. I'm in Canada too, so shipping them up from the States is no joke. No, I wouldn't. I know better than to touch surface mount. And yeah, these are thermo tweez. So they're designed to remove chips off boards is their main use, which is why I'm using them to strip heat shrink. I have no use to actually use them for their intended purpose. This is all just kind of a package deal. So I'm not intending to use that to actually solder parts back on, and I'm not lifting a bunch of quad flat packs or anything else off of the board. So I don't care about burning up those tips. They're really basic, cheap ones anyway. Oh, really? Okay. It looks intimidating. That's why I haven't tried it. And most of the mod work and tutorials I follow are all home gamer through-hole stuff anyway. So I've got the hot air tools to do it. So maybe I'll give it a crack sometime. 24 is also a ground pin. Thankfully, I'm keeping my counts better now. I still remember struggling without flux as a youngin'. I fought forever trying to get things to stick. I never thought that flux could make that big of a difference. And then the first time you try that stuff, man. So that's good to know. Are you using actual like solder wire when you're doing your SMT stuff, or do you use the solder paste with a hot air gun? So I've gotten some of the paste, but I haven't really had a chance to use it yet. Is here. Okay, cool. So you do modding work too. Are you a pro or just your own stuff? Paste to start, then wire for rework, right. Oh, very neat. All right. So yeah, sounds like I've got some pros in here that know a lot more than I do. Radio equipment for planes and ET. Wow. All right. You got some chops then, I imagine. Your work must have to be pretty tidy if you're talking about ATC. I imagine they're pretty picky about the quality of work. Oh yeah, military government stuff is, they set the bar high for sure. I've done just testing work on those boards, and the amount of documentation that has to go along with it is ridiculous compared to an average order. Lead solder too, no joke. .22 is ground. Yes, it is. I guess the military doesn't care about leaded. Whatever they think works best is what they get. They don't play by the same rules, maybe. Yeah, it's ugly. Fix that. I have, yeah, I'm kind of bad at that. I have heard people say always tin your tips before you put it away, because it will prevent the oxidization. I'm trying to get extra solder off here, but sometimes I do still mess it up and clean it and then wreck it. Five years. Right? Do as I say, not as I do. It's hard to break those habits, for sure. Oh man, I'm only hitting the halfway point here. $20 is no connection. Endgame is I get this whole IDE cable rigged up. And so what this is going to let me do, I installed a piggybacked BIOS chip on the old one with a switch between the supply voltage on it. So I can turn either a modified BIOS chip on or the stock Dreamcast one. The modified one doesn't check for the normal disk drive in the Dreamcast. And it will boot straight off of a drive connected to the IDE connection. So anything FAT32, there's probably some partition size limits that I'm not aware of. But I've got a compact flash adapter, IDE, so a 32 gig card that I can slot in there and it'll read games off of there. Because the lasers in these disk drives are prone to failure, which I think most of the old consoles are. And eventually it's going to die and I don't want to get a replacement for it. So this is my backup plan. $19 is ground. We're on to pin 18. That's the halfway point. I don't know if it was notoriously hard to mod. It used a bog standard IDE bus to read and write, or just read, I guess, from its disk drive. So yeah, it lets me literally just take this cable, solder it in place, and I don't even need a BIOS chip for it. If you run just a boot disk in the normal disk drive and set your IDE drive to a slave on the cable, then it works fine that way too. I just don't want to have to, if the disk drive dies, I can't run a boot disk, so this is a way to avoid that entirely. MVC. It might be that they only recently figured out how to change it. I think most of the guides I'm following, I've kind of compiled the information from a bunch of sources, but they're all around 2014, 2015. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure then. I was under the impression pirating was fairly easy, like just burn a CD-ROM. I think you had to know, maybe you needed special settings, because this is a GD-ROM, technically, is what they called it. It used CDs, but there was extra data on it. So some burners, you couldn't burn it. But for the most part, I don't think you actually needed anything. Yeah, out of band, I think we're talking about the same thing. People did find a way on some burners, I believe, to write the extra data that's missing, or they compressed their images somehow so it would fit on a normal CD and you would lose fidelity in the audio or something. Okay. Interesting. I haven't heard of that, actually. That'd be pretty cool. There is a much simpler mod that you can get for this thing. It costs like $200 right now, though. It's a complete drop-in replacement for the whole disk drive, and it will read an SD card directly. And you can just put a normal ISO file on it, and without any BIOS mod or anything, it sends all the correct information as though it's reading a disk. So there's no emulation, no other issues with reading it, but it's a lot more expensive. So the method I'm using isn't 100% compatible with all games. Most of them, or the ones I care about anyway, are fine. But yeah, the other option is even better. I mean, I tinned it before I put it away, see that? I'm learning. All right, it's 18. Man, it's hard to fight the urge to clean that before I rack it. Yeah, it is cool, but very pricey. All right, thanks for dropping by, Jeffers. Have a good one. Appreciate you hanging out. And Yanon, thank you for a follow. Much appreciated. No, Jeffers, you followed too. Thanks, man. Hope you have a good one. Catch you around sometime. We're in the home stretch. Well, that was something. That was an ordeal. It's done though. The signal wires anyway. And I got lucky. One of these wires I had butchered while I was trying to separate the cable, and ended up pulling a big chunk of the copper out, which was not my intention. I was worried about how I was going to handle that, if it was going to reach the pins or whatnot. Turns out that one doesn't even get connected, so I got really lucky there. This is 39. That was going to be for a LED, activity LED. Don't know if I need it, so I'm keeping this one long. The others I'm just trimming kind of short. I'll insulate them properly. And then we have a bunch more wires here that are all ground. So I'm going to strip these all short and keep them just up here. And then I'm going to go and see if I can bridge them all together. That's going to be pretty tedious too now that I think about it. And then they'll all just get tied onto one common ground point. It doesn't look like it's critical which I use. And I like that. Yeah, we're just going to the ground plane. And then I think I'll be ready for a test. So here's what I'll do to make my life even simpler. Is I'll only take the grounds, like I've mentioned before, this cable has extra ground wires on it, and I don't know the reason for that. But most of these grounds won't be connected to any of the pins, and so they won't strictly be necessary. Actually, if I think about this smart, which I would recommend, because these are already bridged together as a ground, I think I can just tie a single ground wire to the ground plane, and then the rest of it's handled in the connector. I'm going to try and cheat. I'm going to see if that's possible. I'll chip off all these extra big ends, though, that I've already stripped before. Here's my 39 that I don't want to lose. I'll treat number 2 as my ground wire. No. Does it recommend a good point? No, anything on the ground plane. Cool. So the ground plane is covered in vias that do have plating on them. Don't know if I want to use those or not, though. I'll try it. I'll see if I can get some solder to stick to it. If not, I'll go elsewhere. There's nice big exposed connections all the way around the outside, but those are going to be to touch the shielding. And I don't want to interfere with the fit of that if I can avoid it. So I won't. gonna scrape off a little extra solder mask. Because even though I could get a test point from here, the solder doesn't even think about sticking to it. So there's no traces anywhere near here. No thin traces. It should be safe. I'd like to use a little more substantial ground than that one little point, so we'll go bigger. Since I'm pushing my luck and using just one wire, I'll make it a big one. That's a little more healthy. Oh, that noise is terrible. Whoa, almost lost the tweezers. I've got these leads kind of tangled, so let's fix that. We've come this far without an accident. I'll wiggle this wire off just to confirm that my connection is good. Okay. I'll hook this up to my ground, and then I'll test a couple of the points I know I need ground for on the connector that we've soldered. And if they all are good, I'm ready to test this out. And hope we don't let the smoke out. 2. I like it. 40's a ground. 30 should be a ground. 26. 24, 22, 19, and 2. They're all grounded. Okay. So that worked. I don't think that an IDE bus will have enough current going through it that running all of these grounds through one lead will have an issue. Don't know until I try. But that's the hope. Now I have to find some way to insulate this wire repair I had to make. It's almost flawless. I came so close. Back in a sec. Well, I can't believe it, but I have completely misplaced my Kapton tape. I can't even find electrical tape. Not even Scotch tape. And I want to test this out now. I did find I do have some heat shrink tubing, but it's gigantic. It's way too big for this wire gauge. I'm going to test shrink a piece and see if it will get small enough. So I switched over to the hot air gun now. We'll see how small this piece gets. Doesn't seem to be getting much smaller than that, and that's still way too big. Of course it's going to blow away. What was I thinking? Well, just to be safe, I'll use some of that instead of green painter's tape. I'll feel a little less embarrassed. And then when I get some proper shrink tubing, I'll use that. I'll come back and rework it. So let me find my broken wire. And it's not soldered in a terribly inconvenient place, thankfully. Things got pretty crowded towards the end there, actually. So if I have to rework something, I'm glad it's near the first wires I was using. That might have been a pretty close size, actually. I'll get a longer piece, because it will slip since it's not going to shrink properly. And whoops, I'm on my mic cable. We're almost done. And then comes the nerve-wracking part where I have to test this and see if this was successful or not. So I found a little offcut I had of electrical tape. I hate running out of supplies mid-job. But we're going to just chop this off and cover up my little repair job until I get a proper piece of shrink tubing. Don't need my ground anymore. Came so close to doing this perfectly. And then I had to trim one wire. I got my counts wrong, got one wire trimmed shorter than it had to be. And when I went back to fix it, it wouldn't reach. So I had to solder in a little splice there to fix my mistake. Gotta be one mistake on every job. Keep you humble. Usually it's one injury on every job. Usually I'm cutting myself or something else. So, you know what, I'll take that. That was wire 31. I remember that number. And I just had a wire pop loose on me too. That's no good. You get in a rush, you make mistakes. I do it all the time. Okay, repair job is attached. Where does this one go? Okay, actually, I don't think I messed this up at all. It seems like it's not even used. I want to make sure of that, though. One pin here looks like it's not populated with anything. Nope, that's supposed to be empty. Okay. I'm not going to trim this any shorter. Actually, now that I look at another one that I know is not supposed to be connected, I had to use these cheap old side cutters. I don't have nice clippers. It seems like it's taking a bit of the insulation back when I'm cutting them off. So I'll be very careful not to touch those to anything. And this is another ground. Yes, we'll trim it short too. So it doesn't look like I'm finished, but I am. Because all these loose wires that are still hanging out here, those are all grounds, and they're all connected already within the IDE cable connector on the end here. So before I even started, I took a multimeter and tested all these and found every other wire in here is already connected to a ground before I soldered anything. So instead of having to run multiple ground wires from the cable to the board, I'm using the internal ground that's in here, and then just running a single wire that's connected to the internal ground, to the ground of the actual PCB. And I'll get a count of the non-connected wires. 4 non-connected wires. I've got 4 short-clipped wires here that aren't connected. There's 1 wire that goes for an LED, which I'm not using, but I've left long in case it happens to be required. I found no documentation indicating that it is necessary to make this work, but I left it long in case we need it, or if I change my mind later. And like I said, these will stay long. So I'm going to pop this mostly back in the case. Not going to be super pretty. I just want to get it running first and see if it works. Now, since all those wires that were popping out the front are actually ground wires, I'm not too worried if they're touching the shielding, because that is intended to be ground anyway. They're all connected on the board. The edges of the board have nice big connectors that touch all the shielding, so it's all connected to ground. So I'm going to try and tuck them out of the way for now. If or when I confirm it works, I'll trim these short and properly insulate them and get them in place so they won't shift on me in the future and mess with anything. Last thing I want is them falling into a fan or something, or touching a live point and shorting it to ground. That's no good. But I'm pretty confident that's not going to cause an issue right now. I'll move my BIOS switch in front of the board here. Grab our top plate, which also functions as a heat sink. Do not want to leave that off. Okay. That sits reasonably flat, actually. It's hung up. Oh, I see. Something that's getting hung up. My fan wire, or my switch wire. All right, I'm pretty satisfied with that. Oh, there we go. It just snapped down for me. Next thing, I'll stick my controller board cover on here. Just so it'll look nicer when that's up and running. The controller board goes here, and that's actually where the fan attaches. It's kind of a convoluted arrangement. It's a bit loose, but I'm not screwing anything down. It's just because the board is sitting tall right now. I get still suspended on that mush of ground wires that are all bundled down there. I just want to have most of the grounds in place. This will sit up here now, because that will connect to this. And then our power supply goes on top of this. There. That took some doing. Okay, I've actually forgotten one other thing I have to do. I hate it when that happens. This board doesn't have power yet. So I could just be testing this using an external IDE hard drive and an external power adapter. I've got one actually, but I want to try and use compact flash because formatting a big old IDE hard drive doesn't sound worth the extra time when it's just 4 wires for power and ground on this thing and we're done. Now I have a power lead somewhere. I'm going to have to go find it. Okay, so here's the power lead I'm going to use. I chopped this off an old busted power supply I have. This takes a floppy power connector. This little card reader board actually can also take the 44-pin smaller IDE cable. I think those are for like laptop hard drives. And that doesn't use a separate power connector, which mine does. But this is what I've got, so that's what I'm going to use. I'll bring back my tweezers again and see if I can strip the heat shrink with these. So I don't have my wire strippers down here with me. And what's real nice about the Dreamcast is the power supply connects to the main board with this nice little connector. So there's a row of tall, sturdy pins that come off the motherboard, and then the power supply slides down on top of them. And they're actually labeled for me evenly: 3.3 volts, 5 volts, and 12 volts. And the floppy style, I believe, uses 12 and 5 volts. I'm going to check that. So I'm just going to strip these back a bit, and I'm going to jam them in the top of here for testing to get the power into the compact flash adapter. And then if that works properly, I'll get a permanent solution. But I want to get everything rigged up physically once I know it works, so that I can have a nice clean mod, and then I'll worry about routing cables and properly wiring. Red is plus 5 volts DC, yellow is plus 12, black is ground. So I was correct. All right, let's see if we can strip it. Kind of slips around. It's not the cleanest, but I think this will do. You know what? I'm not going to muddle this up. If you got the right tool for the job, you might as well use it. No sense being lazy. Just go to the garage and grab it, and this will go a lot smoother. I'll trim off the burn that I just made. It's a bit big. Love these things. I like this better than the simple style wire strippers. It has a nice mechanical action that grips the insulation and moves it off. The only problem is when the jaws come back together, it tends to, on a cable that's got multiple little wires inside. I forget what that's the proper term for that. But anyway, when it comes back to center, it actually pushes some of those wires back and up and makes it really ugly. And it doesn't lay flat. So I found a way to usually take care of that by just pulling the wire out manually before the jaws come back together. But it's not perfect. These are kind of old though. I'm sure when they're brand new they work much better. Yeah, I think I'll tin these with my solder actually, so they'll hold together nice when I'm shoving them in here. See if that behaves any better. It's not perfect. I'll pull the power supply board back off and then see if maybe I can insert the wire at the same time that I push this down. Oh yeah, okay, that'll work. So there's actually kind of a pinching action that's happening here when this comes down. I think I can use that pinching to make a good connection. Maybe I'm wrong. Try it with something that doesn't have a big wad of solder on it. Yep, I'm happy with that. I won't even have to tin them because it's going to pinch. 2 grounds. They've even got 2 ground pins here. It's like this thing was made to be a PC power supply. 3 grounds, I stand corrected. I don't think this is good for a long-term solution because it's going to add extra strain to that connector, and it might affect the quality of the ground connection. But I'm pretty confident that this isn't going to slip off and short while I'm testing. I'm just going to check that my grounds are indeed connected. Yep, okay. I didn't know if the order of my grounds needed to be specific on the floppy connector or not, because they are separate wires. But it appears that doesn't matter. Okay, I think I'm ready to test. Everybody cross your fingers. And we'll all hope that it doesn't blow up and let out the magic smoke that makes all our electronics work. I'm going to take this to the other room. I won't bring the camera right away just in case it doesn't work and I'd have to come back and do more troubleshooting. If it doesn't work, I don't know if I'm going to dive into it today and figure out what's wrong. I did most of the grunt work, so if there is troubleshooting to be done, we're okay. If it does work, I'll bring the camera over and show the boot up and how it works. Here we go. Okay, sit rep. It came back in more pieces than I left, which means I had to troubleshoot, and it's not working. So I'm not going to dive into it today. I got, like I said, most of the grunt work, all the wiring's done. I just got to figure out what's going on. I may have something being grounded that shouldn't, or something that should be grounded that isn't. When I'm switching between the BIOS chip, one of them gives me some video signal, nothing actually on the screen, but the TV sees a video signal coming in. When I switch to the other one, I get nothing. TV says no signal at all. That's different from what I saw before when I first finished the BIOS mod, because both of them worked without failure, so something has changed. Now, one thing I realized that has changed is previously I was running a piece of plastic on top of the BIOS chip when I had the heatsink on top, because I was afraid some of my legs might stick up and hit the shielding that sits above it. And I wasn't doing that today, so what I'm concerned is some of the legs might have touched the top. None of them stand proud of it, but I can't be certain. If that would have happened, who knows? But I was getting different results depending on which chip I'm using. So that part of it is curious. Like I said, no signal at all for some of it. Now, one thing that has me worried is while I was testing this, I tried taking it out of the shielding, which is why it's not wrapped up like it was before. And one of the ground wires here pushed forward into the controller port board that sits in front. It must have touched something on the bottom of the board here, but that caused the console to turn off, which is expected. If something messed up, that could have happened. I can't seem to get a power light after that, though. I haven't tried in depth, so I'm hoping if I did blow something up, it might be easily replaceable. Could be a fuse on here that would just need to be replaced. But that's the current status. One of the wires shot forward, touched a point it shouldn't have. I probably should have wrapped them up better, of course. Hindsight 2020 and all that. But you get in a rush to see something finished. You get excited, and that's when you make your mistakes. It happens to me all the time, and I never seem to learn. So, yeah, I'm not going to dive into troubleshooting today. I'm kind of tired. I've got a lot of wires done. I don't feel like pulling it all apart again. If I can't find a way to get it booting up at all, not turning on any power, I'll look at the power supply, see if I can figure out if it's sending voltage, where an issue could be, smell for the blown, the blown component smell, troubleshoot that. If it does power on still, but I can't get a signal, I'll go look over all my wires. I'll tidy up these loose ones to make sure they can't connect anything. Double check all my connections, make sure nothing is moved, and that I haven't accidentally shorted anything. And if that doesn't work, I'll go with my old standby technique of yanking the whole thing out, remove every change I made since it last worked, which is desoldering this whole ribbon cable, and then try and power it on. And if that works, then we start over. If it doesn't work, then I might have killed a Dreamcast by just making a stupid error and trying to rush myself. These things happen, though. So that's going to be all for me today. I'll take a little time, cool my head, calm down a bit, and then come back at this with a fresh state of mind. So thanks to everybody who joined me today. Hopefully this can be educational for somebody else. It's unfortunate that happened, and I don't have a nice video to show of me playing games off of an IDE adapter, but sometimes life doesn't, it's not that kind to you. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.